Hello everyone, this is Piston. In this video, I will help you with what you should pay attention to when learning an IST setup. If all you think when you hear the word IST is a sequence of magic steps to follow exactly to get infinite materials, and you keep on ruining the ROM because of one input in one step, this video is for you. So what's scary for most people is that IST is a very complicated glitch. And to understand it fully, not only takes time and effort, but also requires some math and coding knowledge. For this reason, most quote-unquote IST tutorials you find on YouTube prefer to explain it as magic that you should just follow exactly without asking questions. While this is the fastest way to be able to execute the setup once for casual players, as speedrunners, it's not the best way to eventually be able to consistently execute the setup. However, you don't need to know everything about IST to understand most setups well enough to execute it correctly and efficiently. Note that you should still already know the basic terminologies like broken slots and corruption, because I won't go over those in this video. So the first thing that you should pay attention to is how many broken slots are used and how many items are scrapped. This is usually near the very beginning of the setup, where you talk to a vendor to set up what is called broken slots. Knowing the number of broken slots will help you keep track of what is being transferred on each reload. Also, knowing what items are scrapped is important. Some steps will drop certain items before talking to the vendor to use those materials again later. Now let's look at two examples. The first example is all shrines, and this is the IST simulator. I'll be going over all my examples in here. Remember, the thing that we need to pay attention to, the first thing is to see how many broken slots are used. And right here we can see the second steps. Break 5 slots, which means this whole step uses 5 broken slots. In the simulator, the broken slots are colored in this dark red. And if you hover over it, you will see the text will not be removed on reload. This is basically the main mechanism of IST. When you reload, these items will not be removed, which means they will be transferred to your next save. So knowing this will let you know on each reload what items are transferred. This script actually doesn't show you what scraps are used, but from the first step, we can see the only material we have is fairy, and it's safe to assume that everything else would be scrap. This means when you start the setup, you should make sure you still have the fairy, and everything else you should eventually get rid of. And knowing this is good because now if you mess up and you have to do some backup, you know which items you must have. The second example is all Kilton Medals. This one's a bit long because it has WMC, but it's also pretty easy. So let's find how many broken slots it has. So here step 10 is break 5 slots with all these materials, and step 11 is also break 5 slots with the other materials. So if you count the total number of broken slots, 5 plus 5, that's 10 slots. And the other part is what items are scrap. So here, after you break the slots, you can see that you have carrots left. So carrot is probably not a scrap, and everything else is, which is the case. But this script actually also tells you what to sell when you break those slots. So here we have all apples, 1 shroom, 1 nightshade, silent princess, and herb. And you might be asking, okay, how do I break slots with 1 shroom? And this is just because whoever made the script was lazy. The actual step would be drop 1 of those materials on the ground, and then sell the rest and pick them up. Then because you have 3, effectively, you're only selling 1. So this is the first and probably trivial step to know, is how many broken slots are used and what items are used to generate those broken slots. Let's move on to the second one. The second thing to note down is count how many reloads there are and see what is transferred in each reload. If it's not already obvious from the name of the glitch, Transferring slot is the most important thing to IST. On every reload, you're transferring slots to the save you load, and the number of slots transferred is equal to the number of broken slots in the setup. Knowing this is helpful because in the first couple times you're executing the setup, you can check before you reload to see what you're transferring or what you're about to transfer match with whatever the simulator says you're about to transfer. Let's just look at one example because this is also pretty trivial. An example we'll be looking at is all Kilton Medals again. And remember, the first thing to do is to count how many reloads you have. So let's just scroll down on the left here. First, step 13, 1 reload, 2 reloads, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's first WMC finished, and the rest is for Omega Ball of Light, so we can ignore that for now. But there are 8 reloads to get to this part. So let's scroll back and go back to the first reload and see what things are being transferred. So if you click on the reload step, that will be the inventory after you do the reload. So you want to click on the step before, and now you can see, oh, I'm transferring Hylian Hood, Endura Carrots, and then 6 is it 6? Yeah, 6 food, slate, and paraglider. So if you know this, and when you're learning the setup, before you do this reload, you can check, okay, do I have paraglider, do I have slate, do I have 6 food, do I have carrot, do I have Hylian Hood? And if you do, then it's correct. You're going to transfer those items, you're going to do the setup fine. And if you don't, then you have messed it up. Alright, with those 2 very basic things to keep track of out of the way, let's talk about more complicated stuff. The third one is note what's the purpose of that reload/slot transfer. Note what we are trying to achieve in each step can help you remember what to do and what not to do. In most setups, you're doing one of the 2 things when reloading. A. Durability transfer, also known as corruption, or B. Duplicating material slots. For example, if the purpose of the reload is to corrupt something, you need to not sync game data by not pressing D-pad and not accidentally opening your inventory. And if the purpose of the reload is to duplicate materials, note down what you are duplicating by checking what slots are covered by the broken slots. And also check which duped materials are important. Usually in optimized setups, all of the duped materials matter, but in some setups, you will just have too many slots and end up duping something that you don't actually need. Understanding this will aid you with memorizing the setup. Sometimes in optimized setups, it's also possible that one reload does both things. If that's the case, you should also note that down. Now let's look at 3 examples because this is very important. The first example is back to our good old all shrines. Remember, the thing we want to keep track of is what's the purpose of each reload. But first, let's do our second thing, which is to count how many reloads there are. So let's look here and see we have 1 reload on step 9, 2 reloads on step 15, and lastly 1 final reload in the end. So we have 3 reloads. Now let's first see what are being transferred on each reload. So before the first reload, we're transferring 2 shields, slate, orbs, and glider. So if you know the setup, or if you know all shrines, you don't actually need any extra shields. So the purpose of this reload would be corruption. And also it's generally true that if you're transferring equipments like weapon, bow, or shield, that's for corruption. And if you're transferring material slots, that's for duplication. But sometimes you actually need to duplicate your weapon, for example, but that's very rare. So the purpose of this reload would be corruption, which means we want to make sure that after we do the reload, we save immediately without syncing the game data. And you can see, actually that's our next thing, but you can see that speed food is corrupted. This confirms our theory that this reload is actually for corruption. So let's look at the next step, which is step 14, just before the next reload. And again, we're transferring one shield and some key items. So again, because we're not transferring any materials, this is probably for corruption again. So make sure that you have reload and you don't do any extra steps and save immediately. So what's the purpose of the final reload? Let's see. This time, because we have duped the orbs, we are only transferring key items. So this reload is actually not doing anything. And I didn't mention this type of reload because this means the setup is done. And usually there's nothing you have to pay attention to after this. If we click on reload, this is our final inventory. You continue the route from this point on, and that's basically GG. And our second example is all Kilton Medals. As you probably already guessed, I only have these setups ready to go. So as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of reloads in this setup, but we'll just pick some and see what they do. So we have already talked about the first one. Yeah, that's the step I'm on right now. We're transferring Slate, Glider, Hylian Hood, and Endura Carrot and all these meals. So again, here you can notice that we're not transferring any equipment. This is usually a sign that tells you, oh, the purpose of this reload is just to duplicate materials. And in this case, because we're transferring Endura Carrot, we're probably going to duplicate that. That's probably going to be useful later, but we'll see. And the main thing that we're duplicating is actually these food. If you know the WMC glitch, which stands for Weapon Modifier Corruption, we need a lot of food in our inventory to do that. And the fastest way to do that is not by cooking, it's by duplicating food during the IST setup. So the first one would just be duplicating materials. You might be wondering, okay, what's this Hylian Hood here? We're not going to talk about this in this tutorial because this is actually something specific that you only see if the setups includes WMC, is to transfer some item into an undiscovered tab. But let's not make that too complicated, and let's look at the next reload. So the step before the next reload, you can see here we have so many things in our inventory, but only the last 10 matters, because remember, that's how many broken slots we have. And this reload, we're just duplicating all the food, reload, and in fact, if you look on the left here, there's a lot of save, reload, and immediately you actually do want to sync game data so that when you save, the updated inventory is saved to your save and reload. So we'll keep doing this until we have a ton of food in our inventory for the WMC glitch. Now let's look at our last example. So the last example is All Quest, which is a very complicated setup and that I have made and very proud of. It actually includes everything you start doing from plateau, because it actually matters what order of items you have as you pick up the materials. So we would just skip to when we start breaking slots. Again, let's first count how many reloads there are. So there's step 27, first reload, step 31, second reload, and then we keep scrolling down. There's a lot of stuff happening here, but 62 is where we do the third reload. And finally 71 is our fourth reload, and there's a reload in the end. Again, that's the sign for GG. After this reload, you can just continue the route. So there are 5 reloads, and let's see what's the purpose of each of those reloads. Except for the last one, because that's GG. Let's go back to the first reload, which is just after you have broken the slots, and we are going to click on the step before the reload. As you can see here, what we're transferring is some weapons, a bow, and some arrow slots, and some key items which you probably don't care, or actually we might, we'll see. But this is a good sign that because we're transferring weapons or just any equipment where we will be doing some kind of corruption. But also note, we're purposely having a core here and actually spirit orbs. So this is one of the examples where for this reload we're both going to corrupt something and we're going to duplicate the core and the spirit orbs. So if we click on the reload, we can confirm our theory by seeing some 999s here. And the reason why we are duplicating the core is because we need that for Stasis Plus. So that's the first reload. It actually does both corruption and normal duplication. And let's see what's the second reload. So here, the step before the reload, you can see that we're not transferring any equipment and we are transferring a lot of materials. So the purpose of this reload is obvious, it's to duplicate materials. And this means you don't have to remember to, oh, I have to save after this reload. Now let's scroll down to the third reload, which is this. And as you can see here, this is probably already very obvious. You can also see something weird happening here. Is that I have my weapons and shield after my paraglider and slate. That's kind of weird. That's actually a special thing you do in IST called unsorted inventory. As you can see here, we're just transferring equipments, so this is probably another corruption step. And finally, the last one. Again, here, as you can see, we're transferring shafts. And we're also transferring weapons, so this is probably another step where we are both corrupting and we're transferring some materials. Which, if we click on reload, that is the case, as you can see some 99s here. But that's enough to know about, and let's go back to the slideshow. So again, the third thing to notice is to know the purpose of each reload, whether it's corruption or duplication or both, and if it's corruption or if it has corruption, make sure to not press D-pad or do anything before the reload and save. So now, let's introduce the last thing to pay attention to, which is actually the most important. If the reload is for corruption, you should note down these three things. First, what you are corrupting and with what equipment. And second, how many slots you are corrupting with one reload. And lastly, whether the slots being transferred are equipped or unequipped. So let's go over each of these. First, checking what you're corrupting with what equipment will help with checking that you have the right things equipped. It's a very common mistake to misremember what to equip or unequip, or to forget to equip or unequip something when a step is not explicitly written. Maybe you're already expected to have something equipped or unequipped from a previous strat, like unequipping shield from BLSS. And this also goes into the second point, which is check how many slots you are corrupting. Sometimes you're only corrupting two things, with, for example, bow and shield slots. In this case, what weapon you have equipped won't matter. Knowing this is also helpful with troubleshooting and with remembering what matters and what don't matter. Lastly, and probably the most important, is to check whether the slots being transferred are equipped or unequipped. So I have to get a bit technical here, but bear with me. When you are corrupting something, the durability of the last slot of equipped type, like a shield, is transferred to the first slot of that equipped type. This is why having the right things equipped is extremely important. Because if you end up with multiple things equipped, like 2 shields equipped, that's possible with IST, or if you end up with nothing equipped, both of those will mess up the alignment and therefore you won't have the corruption. To make sure the equip slots line up with items we want to corrupt exactly, the setup usually unequip things at certain steps to make sure only one slot per type is equipped after reload. This can be done in two ways. First is you equip the thing, and then you save, so that in your save you have equipped slot. Then you transfer an unequipped slot by unequipping the thing and then reload. Or the second way to do this is to unequip or drop the thing and then save. Then you will have an unequipped slot in your save. And before you reload, you actually want to equip something and then reload. This means you're transferring an equipped slot, and that also counts as the equipped item after the reload, so corruption can still happen. So what you have to note down is if you're transferring the equipped or unequipped slots. Know that it's usually more common to transfer an unequipped slot and have the thing in your save equipped, and it's less common to actually have the thing unequipped in your save and transfer an equipped slot, but it does happen and you have to notice that. So how can you use this to help with not messing up the setup? Well, if the slots being transferred are unequipped, that definitely means that for the corruption to work, you have to have an equipped slot in your save. So if you remember that the step tells you to unequip before you transfer, that must mean before you save, you have to equip something. If you remember it in this way, even if the step doesn't tell you to have that equipped, you are going to check that you have that equipped when you make the save. Let's look at one example of this. And the example again is all Kilton Medals. So I have selected this reload, step 51, where you are transferring some materials and some equipment. So this is the case where noting what's important is actually useful. We have 10 broken slots here, because the more broken slots we have, the faster it is to dupe the food. We actually don't have the food here because we don't need it anymore, but the broken slots still remain. So in this case, it actually doesn't matter what materials we have here. All that we need for the corruption is the shield and 2 weapons. So this is actually interesting, because as you can see here, I'm about to reload and I'm transferring 2 weapons and the shield. Oh, my shield is actually equipped and my weapons are actually unequipped. This will mean in my manual save, in the save that I'm about to reload, as you can see here, I can see my saves on the bottom. If I click on manual save, oh, I have my weapon equipped and actually don't have a shield. So for example, if you forgot if you should drop the shield before you save, you're just going to remember, oh, later, before I reload, the only thing I have to do is unequip weapon, and then don't unequip my shield, and that's because I want to transfer and equip the shield to my manual save, which means my manual save definitely don't have a shield. That means I have to drop a shield. And this is also true for the next step. This is the step before reload. I'm actually transferring the inventory is in a wacky order with some things in the front, some things in the back. But the point is I am transferring a shield that's equipped and I'm transferring the weapons that's not equipped. And most likely when you do corruption, it's going to be something called a chained corruption. It's called chained corruption because when you reload for a corrupt, you're going to set up the next corrupt on the same save that you load. Because usually you have to reload to corrupt, then you have to do another reload to actually get those corrupted materials. So if you don't do chained corruption, it will be 2 reloads per corruption round. But if it's chained, then you can reload to corrupt on the first one, then immediately use that reload as the first reload for the next step, and in the end you're going to do an extra reload to get all of your corrupt things. So in chained corruption, because you're always loading the same save and you keep corrupting that same save, the slots you transfer are always going to be the same equipped or or unequipped. Like previously I have my shield equipped and weapons unequipped, I'll always have a shield equipped and weapons unequipped for the same chain. So that's also helpful to know, to see if something is chain corruption or not chain corruption. Again, just to reiterate, these 4 things actually all closely tied to each other. First, knowing how many broken slots are used and know how many items are scrapped. Knowing how many broken slots are used will tell you what is transferred in each reload. And of course, count how many reloads they are. If you don't know how many reloads they are, you can't click each reload to see what it does. So third is to, once you know where those reloads are, you can check the purpose of those reload, and if the reload is corruption, make sure you do the corruption correctly. And lastly, again, if the reload is for corruption, these 3 things will help you to memorize how to do the corruption correctly. So that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully that was useful, and thank you for watching.